Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Golding, and today, unfortunately, I do not have a whiteboard available, so I will speak a little slower than usual and perhaps give you a chance to write things down as I'm going. Of course, you can always review or rather rewind the tape if you missed something, but I do apologize about that. We're going to talk today about Aristotle. Today is going to be our first class on Aristotle. And we've already talked a little bit about Aristotle. Of course, Aristotle is this ancient Greek philosopher who was a student or a disciple of Plato's. And in certain ways, Aristotle disagrees with Plato about some important things. We've already talked about some of Aristotle's objections to the theory of the forms and the theory of the good. And today what we're going to do is get into Aristotle's understanding of what is the ultimate good. We're also going to talk about something known as teleology. This is a very important notion for Aristotle. The word teleology is spelled T-E-L-E-L-O-G-Y. Teleology. T-E-L-E-O-L-O-G-Y. Did I spell that right? Teleology. So the doctrine of teleology is an important one for Aristotle, and you can sort of see it a little bit in Plato, but he doesn't make it quite as explicit in his theory. In any case, before we get to, so the two main things we're going to talk about today are Aristotle's theory of the good and this thing called teleology. So I do want to say, though, although Aristotle disagrees a lot with Plato about some important things, it's going to turn out that in the end, Aristotle actually agrees with some very basic things that Plato believed in as well. In particular, Aristotle basically accepts moral universalism and moral objectivism. Okay, those are terms that we've discussed before. And we're going to see how Aristotle does accept those doctrines ultimately. There's a lot of overlap between Plato and Aristotle. All right, so one of the jobs that you have as a student in this class is to try to make sure you understand where Aristotle agrees with Plato and where he disagrees with Plato. Okay? All right, well, let's talk a little bit about what I'm calling, what has been called, the doctrine of teleology. T-E-L-E-O-L-O-G-Y, teleology. Okay, so this word teleology comes from the Greek word telos, or telos, that is T-E-L-O-S. That's a lot easier to spell. So telos is a Greek word which means goal or end or purpose. It can sometimes mean intention, but basically the word telos refers to a goal or some kind of an end or some kind of a purpose that either a human being or some creature may have. Okay, a telos is a goal. Now, in English, we have some words that, aside from the word teleology, which we'll explain a little more, but there's the word television, telecast, teleprompter. Those words are derived, combinations of other words derived from using the word, the Greek word telos, to go forward to something, to forecast something, to look at something that's somehow related to these English words. But anyway, for us, the important thing is that, number one, is the word telos means a goal or an end or some kind of a purpose that either a human being or some creature is in some way aiming to achieve. That is a telos. Now, Aristotle believed, and it's pretty clear that Plato believed in this too, and a lot of people believe in this, but there's something called the doctrine of teleology. So the doctrine of teleology doctrine of teleology is a view that Aristotle had, which is basically that every natural creature has a goal or a purpose or an end that is suited to the nature of that being or thing. I'll say that again. Every natural creature, I'll talk about what that means, but every natural creature has a goal or a purpose or a telos, an end, which that thing naturally seeks to fulfill. And that end or goal is suited or fitted to the nature of that thing. Okay, so Aristotle believes that if you just look around the world and you study nature, you see that nature itself, the way the world is inherently teleological. There is a natural teleology that is just somehow built into the very nature of things in the world. Okay, so for example, this is an example that I'm going to use a lot in this class, but it's a very simple, straightforward example. You have, let's say you have an apple seed, right? You have an apple seed, and you take that apple seed and you plant it in the ground, or it could be that the apple seed maybe naturally falls off, somehow falls out from some other apple and, goes into the ground. That apple seed, by nature, it is seeking a certain goal or end, and that is to become a beautiful blossoming apple tree. Okay, so again, if you have an apple seed, this is just one example that we find rampant throughout the universe, throughout the world, throughout the natural world. We find teleology. We find that things by nature seek to fulfill a certain goal or purpose, and in this case, the apple seed naturally seeks to become a beautiful blossoming apple tree. Okay, or if you have, another simple example would be, a chicken lays an egg, and in that egg there is some kind of an embryonic creature, and its destiny as it is what it is ultimately to become a rooster or a hen or whatever the gender of that particular species happens to be, that particular entity. Okay, it has some kind of a built-in structure that if things play out the way they are in some sense supposed to play out, then by nature that embryonic thing is going to become a living, clucking rooster or hen or whatever the case may be. Okay, so obviously you have, animals. Animals are teleological creatures, okay? It is in the nature of, let's say, certain types of animals to be certain kinds of hunters, right? It's in the nature of a cow, if it's a female cow, let's say, to develop those things that female cows develop, and to, the natural telos of a female cow is to give milk to its children. This is just the way nature is. Nature is inherently goal-directed or purposive or teleological. So again, the doctrine of teleology is that every natural creature has some kind of a goal or telos which by nature it is seeking to fulfill. Of course, human beings are natural creatures. We are part of nature, and so therefore it follows that, according to Aristotle at least, the human being has a natural end or goal which by nature it is seeking to fulfill. Okay, and ultimately, in a way, Aristotle is going to say that that is the true good, the ultimate good for a human being is to fulfill the telos of the human being. Now, by nature, we're going to have to get into more details as to what is the natural telos of the human being. But we are, the important point here is that according to Aristotle, the human being, just like any other creature, is designed in such a way as to seek naturally a certain end or goal. And let's talk about that little phrase, that is suited to the nature of that creature. Remember, in my definition of teleology, I said that the teleological doctrine is that every natural creature has a telos that is suited to the nature of that being. So, for example, you don't expect, it would be weird, it would be bizarre, it would be strange and unnatural if somehow an apple seed were to develop into a chicken. That'd be crazy, that'd be weird, right? In other words, and similar the other way around. If you had this, little embryo in a sort of fetal stage, whether it's inside an egg or inside a mother's womb, it would be very weird and bizarre and unnatural and strange and crazy if that thing were to develop into an apple tree, right? The telos of a given thing is suited to the nature of that entity. Okay, so Aristotle actually spent a lot of time talking about the idea of potential or potentiality. Potential means a kind of capacity that a creature has that sort of is built in, latent within that entity, the potential of that thing, and the actualization. To actualize the potential is to sort of realize, play out what is inherent in that very thing. So, for example, if you do see, let's suppose again my example of the example of the apple seed. Apple seed, suppose you take that apple seed and you plant it in the ground and you water it and you make sure it has enough sunshine and so on and so forth, then latent within that seed is the potential to become the apple tree, right? So that would be the actualization of the potential would be if and when that apple seed becomes the beautiful blossoming apple tree in all of its wonderful glory. So then you would have the actualization of the potential. So actualization of potential means that the thing has either reached or is reaching its telos in some way. Okay, so everything in nature has a potential, and again, suited to the nature of that thing. What was that phrase again? Suited to the nature. The telos is suited to the nature. Now, we might say that given that we've developed modern science and gone a lot further than Aristotle knew about the natural world. By the way, Aristotle, somewhat unlike Socrates and Plato, Aristotle was very interested in a scientific study of the natural world. He would collect specimens of various kinds of species. He was a very big student of the natural world. Okay, now he didn't have modern science, and that's another topic in itself, of course. But modern science, I was going to say, we know a lot more about, let's say, how it actually works, right? Now, how is it that the seed has within it, we talk about the DNA of something, we talk about its genetic characteristics, genetic properties, right? So Aristotle would say, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Within the seed, or within the human being, within the seed of the human, there is this genetic structure which in some way, it doesn't completely determine how that creature is going to develop and act and be, but it determines a lot of it. And there has to be some outside forces that come into play to allow that telos to be realized. Okay, but I'll get to that point in a second. I just want to nail down this one point again, that a very important point is that the telos of a given thing is determined by the nature of that thing. According to Aristotle, things in the world have a certain nature, they have a certain structure that's just part of their natural put together, okay? And so, given the nature of the apple seed or the nature of the human embryo, let's say, the telos of the of the embryo is to become a full blown human being with all of its proper activities. Now, we're going to get into more detail about what specifically the telos of the human being is like. We have a telos that is different. It shares some characteristics, but it's also different from the telos of animals. We'll get to that. Now, a point I wanted to make first before we go on, again about teleology, is that this is a very important point as well, is that we said that every natural creature has a telos, a goal, or an end that is suited to the nature of that thing. Okay, now, important point to recognize, Aristotle would say, is that not every creature realizes or actualizes its potential. And that could be for a few reasons. One big reason is that, as I already alluded to this point, that there are certain external circumstances that have to come into play in order for a given creature or entity to successfully realize its potential. Okay, so for example, if you have an apple seed and you plant it in the ground, but let's say there's a drought, let's say there's no rain, there's no water, or let's say there's not enough sunshine, then unfortunately for the little apple seed, it may not develop into the beautiful blossoming apple tree. Okay, and worse things can happen. Like, for example, let's suppose somebody takes the apple seed, rips it out of the ground before it even gets started, and just, I don't know, swallows it, eats it, throws it away, flushes it down the toilet. And so that apple seed does not reach its natural telos. Okay, and this, when you crack eggs in the morning and eat them for breakfast, so in some way you interfered with the natural telos of the egg. Okay, so but Aristotle thinks that each natural creature has a certain telos that's suited to its nature, but there's no guarantee. In fact, in many cases, unfortunately, the natural creature doesn't reach its telos. Okay, and the same thing can happen with a human being. By nature, we have a certain telos that we are supposed to, in some sense, fulfill by nature. But some people don't make it, and there are various reasons for why some people don't make it. Now, one thing that's we can already talk about this a little bit. One thing that is, distinguishes a human being from other creatures is that human beings are able to deliberate. To deliberate means to make decision, to think about, should I do this or should I do that? Should I do this? That's to deliberate is simply to, go through a process where you think and decide what you should or should not do. Human beings have rationality. Okay, that's a big thing for Aristotle. We'll talk more about that. But human beings are rational creatures, so we have intelligence, unlike many, many. In fact, Aristotle would say, basically, the human being is really the only truly rational creature on Earth. We could argue about certain kinds of animals, but anyway, one of the distinguishing features, if not the most important distinguishing feature for the human, according to Aristotle, is that we are intelligent. We have rationality. We also have the ability to choose. That's really what I was focusing on right now. We have the ability to choose, make decisions. And we're going to see that, for the apple seed, there's no choice in the matter. There is a telos. The apple seed is, in some sense, supposed to become a beautiful blossoming apple tree. But there's no, the apple seed, and as the apple seed is growing, let's suppose the apple seed is starting to spread forth some roots and shoots inside the ground. It's starting to emerge. It's starting, let's say, I guess, apple tree, it becomes like a little bush first, and then it starts growing. There's no thought process going on there. It's not like the little bush is deciding, now it's time for me to grow a little more, or now it's time for me to take a little rest and not grow some more, or now it's time for me to take in some sunshine. I mean, the process of an apple seed becoming an apple tree does not involve any choice or decision making on the part of the apple seed or the bush. In the case of a human being, it is different. In the case of humans, because we have the ability to choose, we have the ability to think, thought and decision making is going to play a very crucial role, according to Aristotle, in terms of whether we realize our telos or don't realize our telos. Okay, and again, we're going to talk more about what exactly is the telos of the human. In the case of an apple tree, it's fairly clear what is the telos, of an apple seed. In the case of an apple seed, it's pretty clear what is the telos of the apple seed. It's to become a beautiful blossoming apple tree. In the case of a human being, that's going to be more complicated, and we'll get to that. But okay, so again, so far, just to summarize what we've been talking about so far, telos, key points, telos, T-E-L-O-S. Telos means goal, end, purpose, some kind of ultimate end that something is achieving or trying to achieve. The word teleology, maybe I didn't talk so much about, the word teleology simply means thinking or reasoning or talking about goals or ends. So if we were to engage in a discussion of teleology, that would mean that we are talking about the goals or ends that certain things have and how they achieve them, perhaps. So that's the word teleology. And now the teleological doctrine, or the doctrine of teleology, which Aristotle believes in, is that every natural creature has a goal, a telos, suited to the nature of that thing, and that every natural creature seeks that goal that is suited to the nature of that thing. Maybe I just repeated myself. Okay, so that is a doctrine of teleology. He thinks it's true. He thinks there's very good evidence that it is true. Look around the world. You see teleology in action all over the place. And importantly, he thinks that the human being, just like any other natural creature, has a telos that is suited to the nature. There is a specifically human telos, okay, that we are by nature designed to achieve or pursue. And then we talked about how not everything makes it to their telos, including humans, okay? I mean, a quick example of that would be, suppose a human being is born, you have a little human there, and you have an infant, and it's starting to develop, starting to grow into a full-blown human, develop, and let's suppose the infant dies of a disease. Well, then the infant did not reach the telos of the human. Okay, so in many cases, the telos is not reached. We also talked about how decision-making and thought processes are going to play an important role, according to Aristotle, in whether we do reach our telos or not. Okay, that is the teleological doctrine. Now, that's like background knowledge for understanding Aristotle's approach to ethics or virtue. So let's talk a little bit about the following phrase I'm going to introduce. We're going to say that Aristotle has a teleological approach to virtue. Teleological approach to understanding what is virtue. Okay, now virtue is something we've talked about before in this class. Virtue means good character. Vice is bad character. And so the study of ethics is, what are the virtues, what is virtue, why should we want to have it, and so on, right? What's the benefit of having virtue? Is virtue a waste of time? Okay, that's really what this class is about. Just using Aristotle and Plato's terminology, they talked about virtue more than so much the term ethics. But again, virtue is good character. A specific virtue would be a good character trait. A specific good character trait would be a virtue. Okay, Aristotle has a teleological approach to virtue. Now, what that means is, Aristotle says like this: we want to know what virtue is, right? That's the goal of this study of ethics, to understand what is virtue and why should we want it. Okay, well, Aristotle is going to say, look, human beings have a telos. Like any natural creature, humans have a certain goal that by nature they are seeking to fulfill. Now, a virtue, or what virtue is those character traits that will make it more likely that we reach our telos. That's what virtue is. Virtue consists, I'll say that maybe a little bit more carefully and definitively, virtue consists in those character traits which, if we have them, we are going to be more likely, because there's no guarantee that we're going to reach our telos, but there are certain character traits that we ought to develop in order to reach our telos. Okay? By nature, that's what we are seeking. That's what we want. Okay? Human beings are creatures of desire and want. And we, deep down, we have a desire to reach our telos. Okay? Again, what exactly is the telos? We haven't gotten to that yet. But whatever the telos is, and Aristotle has a theory to elaborate what the telos consists in for humans, but virtue is going to consist, right now we're sort of painting the broad picture. Virtue is going to consist in those character traits, those attributes that we need to have in order to reach our telos. Okay, that's the teleological approach to virtue. Okay, we've talked about teleology. We've talked about the teleological approach to virtue. Now we're going to discuss a little bit in the remaining time of this particular class. We're going to talk about the beginning of the reading that you have in your text. Aristotle talks about the highest good. What is the ultimate good? What is this notion of a highest good? Okay? And by the time we get through this, you're going to see that I'll give you a little hint. In the end, it's going to turn out that the highest good for the human is the telos of the human. The ultimate telos of the human being really is the highest good. But put teleology and the teleological doctrine on the back burner for a few minutes, and let's just focus a little more closely with Aristotle on the notion of a highest good. Aristotle poses the question, what is there such a thing as a highest good? Okay, now before we can talk about a highest good, maybe we should talk about what a regular good is, according to Aristotle. All right, so what is a good? Okay, we can use the word good in different ways, but when Aristotle speaks about a good, essentially that means a goal or an end that someone is trying to achieve. Not necessarily the ultimate telos, but any goal is in some sense a good that that person is trying to achieve. Okay, so for example, Aristotle says that, Aristotle says that any time a person does an action, chooses to do an action, anytime a person chooses to do an action, there's some good at which that person is aiming. Okay? So, for example, if you get in the car to go to your job, then I'm going to pause the video for a second. Okay, we are back. I just had to relocate. So we were talking about Aristotle's use of the term good. think of good here with like a little g, good, okay, lowercase good. If you get in your car to go to your job, right? So that action aims at a certain good. The good in that case might be, you know, if you're getting in the car to go to your job, then the good that you're aiming at is getting to your job, right? If you take a walk to go to the supermarket, so the good that that action is aiming at is getting to the supermarket to buy food. Now, that action of going to the supermarket to go shopping in order to attain food, you know, there's some other good that you have that that good is sort of filtering into, right? The good that you're aiming to get by getting the food is eating, right? And so there's many actions that people do, and Aristotle actually talks about how every science, every art has some good that it aims at. Okay, so like for example, the art of carpentry is to build furniture or something like that. It might be hard to state exactly what is the good of a specific art or a specific craft, right? There's shipbuilding, there's engineering. Those are arts or sciences which aim at producing some good or goal. That is the good for the sake of which those things are done, right? So um, now there's what we can talk about intermediate goods, right? Intermediate goods would be goods that you pursue because you really want some other good that that good filters into. Now, in a way, we talked about this when we were studying Plato. We were talking about how there's this distinction between doing something for its own sake and doing something for its consequences, right? So this is a similar distinction or similar discussion. Uh, that is to say that you may do certain things because there's some good or goal that you're trying to achieve, and then the reason why you want that good is because there's some further good down the road that that good is going to filter into. So, for example, let's suppose you get into your car to go to school to study because the good you have there is to get your goal is to get to the university to go to a class, and then you might ask, okay, well, why does that person, why do you have the goal or the good of studying in class? Well, the goal is to get a degree. So then that would be, in a way, a higher good than the good which is just going to class. And why do you want to get a degree? Well, because let's suppose the reason why you are pursuing a degree in college is because you want to get a job. And so now that's really the goal. That's the good for the sake of which you are going to school to get the degree, to get the job, right? And then you might ask, okay, well, what is the goal of getting a job? Is that the end? Is that the end goal, getting a job in and of itself? Or is there some other goal for the sake of which that is pursued? Now, maybe the goal is to make money, okay? So then the goal, the higher goal, see, there's going to be a hierarchy of goals or goods, okay? Right? It's sort of the way Plato said that, the ultimate goal, the reason for why you're doing the action is ultimately the ultimate goal, right? Is there some goal behind that goal? Well, then that goal is really the higher goal. So we can talk about intermediate goods. Intermediate goods are goods which are pursued or chosen for the sake of some other good, right? And we can talk about a hierarchy of goods. If one good is really the one for the sake of which you're pursuing a lower good, right? Then that first good is really the reason for why you're doing what you're doing. That's the true good that you're pursuing. Okay, so now the question becomes: now we know that we can take it as a fact that people do things, people act, people pursue all sorts of things in life. They do all sorts of actions. We cultivate all sorts of character traits and habits. And so we definitely are pursuing many, many goods. There's money, there's friendship, there's love, there's pleasure. There's lots of goods that people pursue. Intellectual knowledge, that's a good. So here's the question that Aristotle poses at the beginning of his text. And the question is there such a thing as a highest good? Is there a highest good? Now, we already know that some goods are, ranked higher than others, at least for some of us, right? Is there a highest good? Is there an ultimate good? Now, Aristotle, in order to explain let's think about this idea of a highest good. Aristotle says that basically there are going to be three, my favorite number, three characteristics, three features that a highest good would have. All right? In other words, there's going to be three qualities that a highest good has that make it a highest good as opposed to a not so good good. Okay? So these three features, number one, and I'm not sure I'm getting these in the order in which he presents them, but basically, number one is that a highest good would have to at least, this is not the only, but at least one of the character traits or qualities of a highest good, is that a highest good would have to be something that is pursued for its own sake and not for the sake of some other good, right? This clearly follows from what we've been saying so far. So let's just call this number one, we're going to call it chosen for its own sake, right? A highest good of the best kind of good that we could imagine would be a good that is chosen for its own sake and not for the sake of some other end or goal. Okay? So that is quality number one. A highest good would be chosen for its own sake, pursued for its own sake, and not for the sake of something else. Now, a second quality, making this now even stronger, of a highest good would be, imagine that you have a good which all other goods that you pursue are chosen for the sake of that first good. Well, then that good would be a very good good indeed, right? So number two is that we're going to call this, we're going to use just a little phrase here, we're going to call this maximal choice worthiness, just to give it a label. Maximal choice worthiness. Maximal choice worthiness means that not only do you pursue that goal for its own sake, but all the other goals that you have, all the other goods that you have, are pursued for the sake of that goal. Then that means that that goal or good is maximally choice worthy. Okay, so number two, the highest good, if there is a highest good, it's going to be something, it's going to be a good that is maximally choice worthy, a good that is pursued not just for its own sake, but a good for the sake of which all other goods are pursued. Okay, and number three, we're going to say that a highest good is going to be something that is self-sufficient as a good. Now, by self-sufficiency or self-sufficient, a good is self-sufficient if, Aristotle says, all by itself it would make life worth living. In other words, let's say there's a good out there such that if you had it, you'd be set. Let's suppose there's a good that I can figure out what it is, and Aristotle is going to say that there is a highest good, okay? But if there is a good such that having that good would make life worth living and nothing else would be needed or desired in order to make life worth living, self-sufficient, you wouldn't want a good that if you had it you wouldn't need or want anything else, that would be a very good good indeed. Okay, so These are three characteristics of the highest good. If there is a highest good, it's going to have to meet these three character traits. It's going to be a good which is pursued for its own sake. It's going to be a good for the sake of which all other goods are pursued, and we call that maximally choice-worthy. And third of all, it's going to be a good which is self-sufficient, meaning a good such that if you have it, you wouldn't want anything else, you wouldn't need anything else. Okay, now Aristotle would ask us, and here's something you might want to think about. Can you think of any other qualities or traits that you would think a highest good, if it's attainable, if it exists, should have? Okay, so I want to plant that question in the back of your mind, but Aristotle thinks he's got, nothing's going to make this good better than it already is, right? It's something that you want for its own sake. And I should add, it's something that you want always for its own sake. It may have some good consequences as well, but it's something that you always would want for its own sake, something that for the sake of which everything you do for the sake of that goal, and something which, if you had it, you wouldn't need or want anything else. Now, these three criteria are in some way related, and you could ask the question, could you have a good that theoretically would have one of these without the other? I think you could definitely, in theory, think of a good that had number one but didn't have the other two, right? There's some goods that you might pursue for its own sake, but they might be sort of, not all by itself. There might be other goods that you want for their own sake too, okay? I think, for example, experiencing simple pleasures. If you think that simple pleasures, Plato gave this as an example of a good which is pursued just for its own sake and not for its consequences. His example of that was, let's say, the smell of a flower. Okay, if I like smelling flowers every now and then. And why do I want to smell flowers? Well, just because I like the smell of the flower itself. That's the end, that's the goal. But if that's all I had in my life, I probably would be dissatisfied, right? So there could be a good which is pursued for its own sake, but all by itself doesn't make life worth living, and is such that there's still other goods that you might want, okay? You might enjoy doing some activity, like let's say you enjoy playing basketball, right? So that might be something you do for its own sake. I mean, you might do it for health reasons as well, but let's suppose somebody just enjoys playing basketball and that's why they do it. Okay, so that would be something they pursue for its own sake. They just enjoy playing basketball, period. There's no other goal for the sake of which they're doing it. Now, it still would seem to be the case that, for at least for many people, if that was the only good in life is playing basketball, that might be dissatisfying or disappointing to some people. So, and Aristotle would say that that's true, that playing basketball cannot be the highest good because it's not self-sufficient and it's not the good for the sake of which you do everything in life. Okay, so anyway, those three criteria for the highest good we talked about. Now the next question is, well, is there such a thing as the highest good, right? Is there such a thing, is there a good, is there a goal or an end for the human being which fits these three criteria? And Aristotle says the answer is yes. And the answer is, what is the highest good? Happiness. Human happiness. Happiness, Aristotle says, this is what everyone believes. This is what the common man even will say, that happiness is the highest human good. Now, we have to be careful about this word happiness. Aristotle's going to say that we bandy around or bandy about the word happiness, but we're going to have to get into a discussion of what is happiness and different ideas about what happiness is. Aristotle is going to have a certain theory of what he thinks genuine, true human happiness consists in. Okay, but before we get to that, let's just go back to this claim. Right now, the claim Aristotle is making that we're discussing here is happiness. Here's the claim: happiness is the highest good for human beings. Human happiness is the highest good for human beings. Let's see how happiness fits the three criteria that we mentioned before. So Aristotle argues that yes, indeed, happiness fits the three criteria. Let's take number one. Everybody wants to be happy. Okay? Now, if I asked you, why do you want to be happy? You would say, well, I want to be happy because I want to be happy. Happiness is an end in itself. You don't choose to be happy or do things that make you happy because, oh, if I'm happy, then I'll be able to do X, Y, and Z. This is what Aristotle says. True human happiness is something that is sought as an end in itself. Happiness is not something you pursue because, oh gosh, if I have happiness, then I'll be able to do X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C, or whatever that may be. Happiness is chosen for its own sake, therefore it meets criterion number one for a highest good. Now the second criterion was what? The second criterion was a little more complicated. The highest good has to be some kind of a good which is such that all other goods that you choose are chosen for the sake of that good. Okay, so Aristotle argues as follows, that any good that you're going to choose, let's suppose you pursue money, you pursue friendship, you pursue getting a job, you pursue whatever it is you're pursuing in life, ultimately you must believe that you must think or believe that that is going to lead to or promote or be a part of your happiness. Otherwise, you would not do it. This is what Aristotle believes, that deep down human beings want to be happy. And everything we do, whether it's going to the dentist, going to our job, going to school, whether it's going out on a date, whether it's meeting friends, whether it's going to a movie, reading a book, studying, learning, playing basketball, whatever the action is, it must be something which you either believe it is a means to your happiness, or you believe that doing that action is in and of itself part of what is going to make you happy. Again, we haven't defined the word happy here, so that's a big question. What is happiness? But right now Aristotle is claiming everything we do, any good that we pursue in the belief that it is going to either lead to happiness or be a part of happiness, and therefore happiness meets criterion number two. Now, third of all, we said that a highest good has to be self-sufficient. Okay, that means that a highest good has to be something that if you have it, you're fixed, you're set, you're kind of done, you've made it, and all you need to do is maintain that good that you've achieved. Okay, so Aristotle claims that if a person achieves happiness, then they're set. They don't want anything else. They don't need anything else. Because if they did, imagine somebody were to say, yeah, I'm happy. I'm totally happy. But you know what? I'm still lacking something. I'm still missing, I haven't gone on the trip around the world that I wanted to go around on, okay? I'm happy, but there's still something else I want to do in life, or there's still some other good I want to pursue in life. Okay, well, if they're saying that, Aristotle would say, what they're saying is they're not happy. They may have a portion of happiness, a part of happiness, but they're not completely happy. Because if you have happiness completely and totally, then that means that you are satisfied. So therefore, happiness is self-sufficient. If you have happiness, you're not going to want anything else. And if you want something else, that means you are lacking in some kind of happiness. And so therefore, happiness is the highest good. Aristotle thinks that this is a rational, solid, logical claim that's based on genuine evidence, that this is, reflection and just looking around the world and talking to other people will lead us to the conclusion that happiness is our highest good. That is what we want. That is what we are aiming for. That is what we are trying to achieve. If we have it, we'll be set. Everything we do is ultimately done for the sake of happiness. Okay, now, again, we have not defined what happiness is. And Aristotle is going to get into a discussion about different theories of happiness and what is the correct. Aristotle believes that there is a genuinely true, valid definition or theory of what human happiness truly is that applies to all humans. Okay, this is a very important point, and we're going to get to that. But I do want to introduce a term which is based on a Greek word. So let me first talk about the word for happiness in Greek is eudaimonia. Now, how do you spell eudaimonia? I'm sorry, I don't have a chalkboard here, but eudaimonia is spelled E-U-D-A-I-M-O-N-I-A. E-U-D-A-I-M-O-N-I-A. That is eudaimonia. Eudaimonia in Greek means happiness. Now, if you take that same word and make it into eudaimonism, okay? Eudaimonism, that would be E-U-D-A-I-M-O-N-I-S-M, eudaimonism. Eudaimonism is a term which means any view that focuses on happiness as the goal of life. So we would say that Aristotle is a eudaimonist. These are just technical terms that are used to describe Aristotle's view. Also, we're now going to say, this is important, we're now going to say that Aristotle believes in psychological eudaimonism. Okay, that is a term. Psychological eudaimonism. Psychological eudaimonism is the view that by nature human beings do whatever they do in order to achieve their own happiness. Aristotle apparently believes in psychological eudaimonism. We by nature, we've talked about psychological egoism, we've talked about psychological hedonism. Now, Aristotle is not a psychological hedonist. He doesn't believe that everything we do is done for the sake of pleasure. That's a specific thing. Pleasure is a specific kind of enjoyment, right? Pain is a specific kind of discomfort. But Aristotle does believe that human beings by nature do whatever they do for the sake of achieving happiness. Okay? And we'll have to talk about whether we agree with that. Essentially, it looks like Aristotle believes in a form of psychological egoism. By nature, we do what is going to make us happy. Okay, again, we haven't defined what happiness is yet, though. All right, now, we'll get back to psychological eudaimonism another time, but the highest good, what we're now saying is that according to Aristotle, what is the highest good? The highest good, the ultimate good, is happiness. And again, going back to the beginning, or maybe not quite the beginning of what we said in this class, but earlier we said in the class that human beings, in order to know what virtue is, we have to know what the ultimate end is. What is the highest good? The telos of the human being, that end for the sake of which human beings are doing whatever they do, ultimately is for the sake of achieving the highest good, which is happiness. So human happiness is our telos. Now, we still need more detail. We still need to fill out what exactly is the highest end. What exactly is happiness? Okay, but let me just point out already how Now we can say how different, now we can understand and realize how different is Aristotle's theory of the good from Plato's theory of the good. Okay, because here's the stark contrast. Plato says that the good is this entity, external entity, being, godlike thing that's sort of like the sun, that's the cause and the source of everything in the universe. It's the being of all beings, ultimate being, beinghood, whatever we, however we understand all that. Plato thinks that the good is something that exists outside of ourselves. Well, we depend upon it and we can engage in some kind of relationship with it, primarily through the intellect, understanding the good, appreciating the good, yeah, but the good is what it is outside of ourselves. Aristotle is saying, no, that's not what the good is. The good isn't something that's outside of us. The good is, for each of us, human happiness. That's the good. The good is not an entity or a thing. All right? We reach the good if and when we fulfill our potential. If we actualize our potential as a human being, then and there we have realized the good, but the good isn't an entity or a thing that is outside of us. The good is the ultimate goal of human living, which is to realize true, genuine human happiness. Okay? Now, again, we need to get more detail on what is Aristotle's theory of happiness and what do we need to do in order to get there. Aristotle talks about different views that different people have of happiness and how some of them are defective. And I think actually what we're going to do is draw this lecture to a close. And next time we're going to talk about some different theories of what human happiness is. I will tell you that this is something to think about. Aristotle is an objectivist about happiness, meaning by that basically there's an objective fact as to what true happiness is. A lot of people, maybe you are a subjectivist about happiness. You think that, well, what makes me happy is different from what makes other people happy, right? And there is no single definition of happiness that applies to all human beings equally. Well, Aristotle disagrees with that. We're going to have to get into this in more detail, but there is a basic, yes, there are differences between human beings. Okay, there are little things. There are little things that tick you off or don't tick me off. Some people like fried chicken, some people like, rib steak, some people like tofu, tuna fish. There are differences between human beings, but basically the ultimate telos of the human being is the same because by nature all humans are the same in the most important respects. Okay, so we're going to draw it to a close here. Think more about whether you think happiness, what happiness is, how would you define happiness? Is happiness something that is the same for all humans or different? Think about those questions and we will continue our lecture, our discussion of Aristotle next time. Thank you and have a good day.